Once upon a time, it was very, very difficult for ACPET to gain a seat at any of the tables that we wanted to be at. The raising of the bar has made a significant difference. The raising of the bar has given us the credibility that we have sought for so long, credibility that we have deserved. Showing the membership, showing other stakeholders that we care about the quality of education, that when somebody becomes a member of ACPET, they are effectively becoming a member of a quality organisation. Doing that has effectively changed the perception by stakeholders of who or what ACPET is.
The first decade really was very much about the forming of the organisation and all the things that go with that, struggling to make sure that the organisation would survive. And the second decade was much more about growth, about building sustainability, about building authenticity. So it's quite interesting to reflect, for me, to reflect back over that time and see the enormous change. We were probably starting with a group of about 10 or 15 people who were passionate about the need for an industry association to represent the interests of the private education and training sector, because there was nothing that represented those interests. One of the early things we did, of course, was to form a tuition assurance scheme, and that was very much about the industry looking after students. So in the event of a college closure, we wanted to make sure that students were looked after. In the very early days, ACPET really was struggling in a financial sense. It had quite poor business systems. It was run on a shoestring, and it looked like it was run on a shoestring.
The ACPET office was shared with the group training office in Melbourne, and Tim had boxes of files around his feet. When we moved the office, when the office took place in Sydney and expanded.
Watching an organisation that started out really as a ma and pa organisation, fighting for every penny and for every spare metre of space to have a telephone and a desk, to a genuinely national organisation.
We had a very large grant from the Commonwealth Government. It provided staffing and resources for ACPET and the ability for it to create a profile. It also created awareness that probably ACPET's own internal systems lacked sophistication, and one of the things I do remember, Tim and I worked on the budget. We got through to the end of preparing the budget and put it out to the members. We realised that we ourselves had forgotten to factor in any impact of the GST, so we'd been busily training all our members and how to respond to the GST, but hadn't applied it to our own business. So that was embarrassing, to say the least. So Tim and I made sure that we never told any members that we'd forgotten to factor in the GST. We just acted as though it was ACPET being very generous to its members and not imposing any significant price rise because of the GST. So I think we got away with that for a long period of time anyway. And one of the things we decided in those very early days was that we actually needed to separate the staffing function from the board function. We set about recruiting Tim, or recruiting a national executive officer, and went through a fairly detailed recruitment process. Julie and I did telephone interviews, and we managed to come up with a short list.
We had an amazing group of candidates for Tim's position, and I think the key decision that actually pushed ACPET to the next level was hiring our first fully professional CEO. Tim had the ability to work with the board, but also he had the government background and the context of how to work with government, which I think we've been very bad at before. And I think the key thing for ACPET was our ability to influence governments.
It was about finding our rightful place with government and actually having a seat at the table. So that was a key driver in the time that I was on the board, was really about building relationships and making sure that the voice of the private education training sector was heard.
And to change the way things were done within the industry. And ACPET led on so many areas. The tuition assurance fund became our dominant and keystone of piece of policy. We pushed through fee help, we pushed through so many other things that have changed the way the industry is now structured.
and suddenly we had staff in each state and territory in Australia. The organisation just grew and developed incredibly under the leadership of our executive officers and the various chairs of the board.
An amateur board, well, when I say amateur board, it was a board that was not a paid board. It was made up of people like myself who ran colleges, we were business owners, we were busy. And at that stage we'd kind of had to been run as a semi-professional organisation. We made the decision in 2000 that to go to the next stage we had to have a professional CEO. At the top level we needed to have professional support staff, and that was the beginning. And Tim obviously hired well. We picked up some key people like Juliana Stuckpool, former senior advisor to several ministers in government, Ruth Rosen, who came from the international sector. So the business started to show the benefits of hiring and also opening offices in key states. We'd been very New South Wales centric, and then it moved to Victoria, and so we kept the New South Wales office. Suddenly we had 2 offices. Then we opened the Brisbane office, and each state there was a lot of pride within the state over whether ACPET was looking after them enough. So appointing people like Michael Hall to be the CEO for Queensland meant that he was able to build that business with Kay Ganley up there in those days, and to incredibly increase the support from government and the number of members. Wherever we opened offices we saw an increase in membership.